If you want to know what algorithms feel like, look no further than stock photographs. Many of the most famous memes over the last decade have been stock photo-based memes. These are images that are posed, taken, and distributed to fill a void in the commercial image market. These are photos that are meant to be in advertisements, that are meant to be in blogs, and they sell a license for them, usually for like $10 or $12. You can do a subscription if you're a company that uses a lot of stock photos, and they kind of get put everywhere in the web. But I think that when you really look at them and really notice them, as a lot of meme makers have done over the course of the past 2 decades, you start to notice things that have a lot of relevance about the overall sort of world we're living in and the way that it's being depicted, pictured, and ultimately changed by these platforms and algorithms that organize our communication and our expression and our representations of the world we share. On a surface level, the draw for a meme maker with a stock photograph is the same as the way it draws in an advertiser. These are infinitely turnable images. They can be applied to a wide variety of contexts, and they're designed to be both extremely specific in that what a stock photo is a picture of, it is exactly the picture of that, but also extremely vague in that you can kind of throw your own associations or your own caption on top of it, which is exactly what memes do. They take an image that is collectively shared and then put a really specific feeling or specific take on top of it. And in a way, this is a parallel or similar process to what advertisers want to do with stock photos. Another reason that stock photos appeal to meme makers is their sort of bizarreness and uncanniness, because often the incentives that are pushing stock photographers, that are pushing the stock photography market platform, are not aligned with the incentives that have to do with realistically expressing what visual experience is like, with really taking a photograph of how people actually behave or what activities and things actually look like. The stock photo is the result of a process that is not aligned with that goal, like much other photography is. Nobody has ever walked in a meadow, gotten angry, or drunk water from a bottle in the exact way that the people in these photographs by the distracted boyfriend stock photographer Antonio Guillem are doing. Rather, these are pictures of maybe the average of mental representations you are expected to have of those activities. This is like the brand that would exist in a movie. This is like the bottle of ketchup that looks like Heinz, tastes like Heinz, is clearly meant to be a knockoff of Heinz, but says Walmart instead on the label. And often this kind of product, the store brand, is labeled with stock photographs. This is a layer of reality that represents the way our world is commonly perceived, the way it's supposed to be perceived, the most normal kind of thing, but in a way, it's actually very much not a part of how the world really is. And that weird, uncanny gap is what makes stock photos so attractive aesthetically to meme makers. You might say stock photos are portraits of stereotypes, or that they represent some kind of hyper-reality, our abstract representation rather than our practical experience. I'm taking the term generic from photography scholar Paul Frosch, who has written really trenchantly about stock photographs and visual culture online. Early memes of stock photographs make fun of the weirdness that the genre tends to fall into while in search of this generic look. The Tumblr blog Awkward Stock Photographs was really popular in the early 2010s, and it was all about finding the stock photographs that were the uncanniest, the weirdest, the furthest from reality. There's also a kind of anti-capitalist angle to this posting in that you're kind of appropriating and using for free an image that technically you're supposed to be paying for. And there's a little bit of a resistance and a reading against the grain by saying these as things for entertainment rather than just sort of ambient parts of the visual world that exist on a billboard or on a pop-up window that you just want to X out. This starts to get a little more socially involved with things like the women eating salad trend, which is really when stock photograph memes explode into the popular consciousness. And this is exposing the way that generic aesthetic ends up reproducing certain biases, particularly sexism and ideas about the roles of women and stereotypes around the way that women look, behave, eat, and act. Like many kinds of art, what memes are doing here is pointing to the way that our generic, normal, expected way of seeing the world and people in it isn't actually that normal, isn't actually that natural, and maybe isn't actually that good, ethical, or just. It's asking us to look otherwise and look differently in order to have a look that produces a better outcome and a better final analysis of what social reality actually looks like. This trend continues in 2011 with the stalking meme photo trend, which is people recreating stock photographs of themselves. So they'll picture themselves holding fruit in the same way or drinking water in the same way. What the stalking trend in particular exposes is the fact that stock photography is the only genre of portraiture where it's supposed to be a picture of nobody. Every person in a stock photograph stands in for humanity in general. They're only differentiated in the broadest possible ways, as child or elderly, as man or woman. She's a construction worker because she's wearing a yellow hat. He's an office worker because he's wearing a blue tie. There's no reason to attach any characteristics to these people other than the most superficial and basic ones, the ones that would fit inside of a caption. Unlike many other kinds of images, stock photos are chained to the words used to describe them, often because these words are literally the search terms that you would put in to get the stock photograph on the platform that the photographer is taking the photo in order to correspond to, and that people are searching to have on their websites. People are looking for an image that will match a string of words, and that's fundamentally what informs this aesthetic. The biggest stock photo platform is Getty Images, which is a little bit like Uber or YouTube for pictures. It works to connect freelance photographers to clients in the same way that Uber will connect drivers to people who need a ride, or YouTube will connect content creators to audiences. It's a platform which, according to economist Nick Cernusek, can be defined as digital infrastructures that enable two or more groups to interact and also position themselves between users and as the ground upon which that interaction occurs. Crucially, Amazon, YouTube, Uber, Getty Images are not just middlemen in a transaction. They are the room that transaction takes place in. They are in many ways kind of the language that transaction is negotiated in, and people who operate on these platforms in these markets have to talk to the platform first and their buyer or their seller second, which means that the platform's programming, the platform's limitations, the platform's preferences become baked into the market. The product for Getty Images isn't just a photo, it's actually more directly the representation of the photo market that they're able to format, sculpt, and sell to the participants within it. The same thing is true of social media platforms, of e-commerce platforms like Amazon. What they're really selling is that ground for the interaction to take place in. And the platform makes money by selling ever more sophisticated representations of this market and engulfing ever larger parts of it inside of its enclosure. How you make money as a platform is by preventing people from leaving. This leads to what Cory Doctorow has called the enshittification cycle, in which platforms at first are really good to customers because they want to lure them in and get their data. Then they're really good to advertisers because they want to lure them in and get their data. And then finally, they're bad for advertisers, bad for customers, but good for their shareholders because they're just trying to squeeze the people that are trapped there and can't move anywhere else to sell their products. The platform needs to be a monopoly, and it naturally has this tendency to monopolize. And as it monopolizes, as it continues to collect data on interactions and then sculpt the market to optimize for this data, what ends up happening is the platform's own methods of data collection, which are often algorithms, its own methods of formatting and disseminating content and interactions, which are often algorithmic recommendation, that ends up being the major forces moving the market rather than supply and demand and the behavior of buyers and sellers. It is the representation of that behavior and the manner in which that representation is leveraged into features and actions and products by the platform that is more important than the thing itself. And so as the principles ordering a platform market get further and further away from reality, people begin to notice this gap between what they actually experience and what they actually want, and what they are able to express, what they're able to order, what they're able to do on these platforms. And stock images, stock photographs live precisely in that gap. In mid-2010s memes, you can observe this trend towards reading stock photographs in a way that's a little less explicitly hostile towards the idea of stock photography itself. But I think this is actually more subversive. By turning the stock photo people into characters like Hide the Pain Harold or Distracted Boyfriend, you're refusing to recognize that image as generic. You're assigning it a lore, you're making it textured, you're making it full of feeling. And that's something that actually goes against this platform's ambition to sort of level all reality into the lowest common denominator that can be plucked out, understood, analyzed, and then leveraged for further gains and, refined, sophisticated representation later on. Memes using stock photographs are attempts to specify the generic, to muddy it up and muddle it, mark it with a human touch rather than this machine touch. Ironically, of course, what a stock photo meme does is just pluck it out of one platform and put it in another on social media, where it circulates and is data analyzed as a meme rather than as a stock photo image. Platforms are essentially archives because they function by collecting data, organizing it, and then leveraging it to produce future outcomes. French historian Michel Foucault has an account of the archive not simply as the sum collection of a bunch of inscriptions or documents, which is sort of how we use the term in general speech, but as the conditions of possibility for future things to be said. And what this means is that the archive, on the one hand, is a literal collection of, let's say, data points that a social media scroll has collected on you. But it is also the structured ways that those data points are related to each other, and then to other data points collected from other people. It is also the structured ways in which that data is collected, the instruments that have been created to search for it among the maze of electric signals that could be sent to the central computers. And then it's the way that data is represented to the engineers, to the user in the form of recommendations, and to the algorithm itself, which is sort of self-cannibalizing and is constantly producing these representations. And so because we can only say what occurs to us to say, because maybe in a more literal sense, we can only say what content moderation or the algorithm sort of gives us the opening to say. And conversely, we can only hear or listen for what we are primed to listen for, what we are allowed to hear. These conditions of possibility that get created by the platform's data collection and sort of data interpretation end up determining a lot of how culture works. It's not everything. You can't be a determinist about it, but they end up creating this image of reality that you, even if you disagree with it, you have to depart from it. And stock photo, the generic vibe, is what that image looks like. That is produced not so much through the interactions of people or through a faithful recording of what's actually happening in the world, than it is through a faithful recording of what those third and fourth order representations generated through the data analysis process offer you as an image of the world. The territory starts to correspond to the map you make of it. Like in urban zoning, a kind of arbitrary descriptive distinction you make for a piece of, let's say, visual, cultural, mental space ends up changing the way that space is structured, the things people do with it, the way people understand it, what people build on it. And so in the same way that you can kind of zone a mental space for what woman looks like or what firefighter looks like and represent that through a stock photograph, you can also, zone something as commercial or as residential or as single family in geographic space. And stock photo memes are all about looking at those zonings that Getty Images, the platform, has produced, that maybe the whole sum of algorithms and visual culture have produced, and saying, is that really the most natural and normal way to do it? Is that really kind of the way we want to keep doing it? Is that really the way we want to keep doing it if we have certain values and ideas about the world that we want to put forward? You also notice that this is the same aesthetic of AI. AI, like a stock photo, all the images, all the text is the most generic thing possible because it isn't about reality. It's about guessing what the most likely thing you're going to say next, you're going to want to look at next might be. And that most likeliness is based on a data analysis of things that have been posted in the past, of things that the AI has woofered up and zoomed up and looked through and interpreted. And what you're seeing isn't reality, but the sum result of structures that have been made to represent and interpret reality, and then further represent and interpret those representations and interpretation, and then test those out and put them back into reality so it can collect data that is sparked and built out of the picture it has made. And the power of these things ultimately lies in their ability to force actual reality to correspond to that picture they make. And that picture is tailored to maximize their profits and actually maximize their power and dominion over representation and human behavior. And that's why stock photo memes are so interesting to me, because they kind of land in this middle point where, on the one hand, they're reading against the grain of the platforms and the way the algorithms see, by refusing to see stock photos as generic, by turning the people into them into characters, or by kind of pointing out the weirdness and bizarreness of them. But at the same time, they just get plucked out and reinserted again into a different platform algorithm where they get read as memes. And this to me is one of the key conflicts that we see with all types of internet culture, where you could be saying something against the system, but the system is so flexible and adaptable that it takes you in and turns you into yet another product to sell, into yet another thing and instrument to use to collect data and create a representation of the world that ultimately has more authority than what any individual person can say, than what any individual machine can say. And that to me is part of the valuable work that memes do, but it's also a key part of media literacy in the 21st century, is being aware that what's driving the way the world looks to the average normie, what's creating the generic aesthetic, the expected way that things should be or appear to be, isn't what other people in power say, it's what the algorithms, platforms, and computers say. And that process is as crucial and important a piece of our public and cultural life as things like censorship or, the publishing houses or the dynamics of an audience are. and it's something that we really need to be thinking about more and analyzing more. Thank you for listening. Hope you have a great day.